I always believed that family was supposed to be a safe harbor, the place where storms couldn't touch you. For most of my life, I clung to that belief like a lifeline. I trusted the people closest to me, the people who shared my blood, the people who had sworn love and loyalty in marriage vows. But sometimes the cruelest betrayals don't come from strangers or enemies. They come from the very people you trusted most. My story is proof of that, and though it nearly broke me, it also remade me into a woman stronger than I ever imagined. When I turned 50, I thought I had already seen the best and worst life had to offer. I had built a comfortable life, a beautiful home, and above all, I had my daughter, Emily. She was the center of my world. The reason I worked hard, saved carefully, and never remarried after her father passed away. My wealth wasn't just numbers in an account or deeds to properties. It was a shield, a safety net for Emily's future. I would have given her anything, everything to make sure she was safe. And then she married Daniel that first. I wanted to believe Daniel was the man he pretended to be. Charming, attentive, ambitious, he seemed like the kind of husband who would protect Emily, stand by her side and help her build a good life. He wooed her with flowers, grand promises, and that easy smile that always seemed rehearsed. I remember the first dinner he had with us at my house. He poured the wine, complimented my cooking, and told stories that made Emily laugh so hard she cried. I watched her glowing, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. And as a mother, how could I not want to believe in that happiness? But from the very beginning, something about Daniel unsettled me. His gaze lingered too long on my belongings, on the house itself, the art hanging on the walls. He asked too many questions about my business, my accounts, the assets Emily might one day inherit. At first I brushed it off as nervous curiosity, a young man trying to impress his future mother. But deep down, I knew. My instincts whispered that Daniel's love for Emily was tied to something darker, something greedy. I tried to warn her once, gently. "Emily," I said, "make sure you know who you're building a life with. Love is one thing, but character is everything." She laughed and kissed my cheek. "Mom, you worry too much. Daniel's good to me. That's all that matters." So, I swallowed my doubts. For her sake, I stayed quiet. Years passed, and on the surface they seemed happy. But little cracks began to show. Daniel quit jobs as quickly as he got them, always blaming his boss, the market, or bad luck. He lived larger than his paychecks allowed, and I began to notice subtle manipulation. Emily, who had once been fiercely independent, began apologizing for everything. Apologizing for Daniel's lateness, his overspending, even his temper. She grew quieter, more hesitant. The sparkle in her eyes dulled. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night, when Emily showed up at my house with tears streaking down her face. She tried to hide them, but no daughter can fool her mother. "Emily," I whispered, pulling her close. "What happened?" "It's nothing, Mom, just a fight. Daniel's under a lot of stress." But later that night, as she slept in the guest room, I overheard her phone buzzing with messages. I glanced at the screen, and what I saw froze me to the core. It was Daniel texting her apology after apology, mixed with veiled threats. "Don't talk to your mother about this. She doesn't understand us. She'd turn you against me." That was the moment I knew Daniel wasn't just a bad husband. He was dangerous, and he was tightening his grip on my daughter. But what I didn't know was that he wasn't working alone. The unraveling began when I received a letter, slid under my door one morning in an unmarked envelope. It wasn't typed, but written in rushed, uneven handwriting. "You can't trust everyone in your family. Watch carefully who Daniel meets when Emily isn't around." At first I dismissed it. It felt like some cruel prank. But then, a week later, I spotted Daniel at a cafe downtown. He wasn't with friends. He wasn't networking. He was sitting with my brother Richard, my only sibling, the man I had trusted all my life, the uncle Emily adored. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching them lean close over papers spread across the table. Daniel looked smug. Richard looked calculating. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I had been punched. My own brother that night. I confronted him. I drove to his house, stormed into his study, and demanded answers. Richard didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and gave me a smile I had never seen before. Cold, bitter, resentful. "Margaret," he said, "you've had everything. The money, the house, the respect. Do you know what it's like to be the shadow, the sibling everyone forgets? We were Dad's favorite. Mom's favorite. Everyone's favorite. And you never even noticed. I stared at him in disbelief. So what? You want to take what I've worked for? What I've saved for Emily? I want what I deserve, he snapped. And Daniel understands that. He sees the future. Emily may be too blinded by love to realize it, but together, we can make sure the wealth in this family finally flows where it should have all along. My heart pounded as his words sank in. This wasn't just Daniel manipulating my daughter. This was betrayal from my own blood. Richard wasn't just helping Daniel, he was his partner. The weeks that followed were a blur of lies, tension, and quiet battles. Emily sensed something was wrong, but every time she asked, I hesitated. How could I tell her that the two men she trusted most, her husband and her uncle, were conspiring against us? But fate has a way of ripping masks off at the worst possible moments. It was during Emily's birthday dinner. We gathered at my house, the table set with candles and her favorite meal. For a little while, I almost believed we could pretend everything was normal. But when Daniel raised his glass to toast her, his phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a message from Richard. Did she sign the transfer papers yet? Emily saw it before he could flip the phone. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted between Daniel and me. What transfer papers? She asked slowly. Daniel stammered, tried to brush it off, but Emily's gaze was locked on him like a hawk. Answer me, Daniel. That was the moment everything unraveled. He tried to spin a story, claiming it was a routine business matter, that Richard was just advising him. But Emily pressed harder, her voice shaking, her hands trembling. And when she looked at me, pleading for the truth, the investigator stepped fully into the dining room, the flickering candlelight glinting off the metal clasp of her briefcase. She closed the door behind her with calm deliberation, as if sealing us all inside with the truth. My pulse hammered in my ears. Elizabeth Shaw, she introduced herself, her voice low but steady. Attorney and licensed private investigator, I represent Mrs. Margaret Whitfield's interests, and I've come with documentation. Daniel's face went pale. Richard stiffened, his jaw tightening. Emily looked from one to the other, then back to me. Mom, you hired her. I nodded slowly. I had to, Emily. I knew something was happening behind my back, but I didn't know how deep it went. Elizabeth has the proof. Elizabeth set her briefcase on the table, right between the untouched plates of food, and clicked it open. Neatly stacked folders slid out, papers clipped, evidence tagged. She laid them down like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Bank statements, wire transfers, property draft deeds, emails. She slid one packet toward. Emily, your husband has been in regular communication with your uncle. Their plan, quite simply, was to coerce you into signing over your mother's estate assets under the guise of restructuring. Once the papers were signed, you would have lost control. Daniel and Richard would have access to the accounts and properties permanently. Emily's hand shook as she opened the folder. Her eyes darted over the highlighted lines, the signatures, familiar names twisted into betrayal. Daniel, she whispered, voice breaking. Daniel tried to grab her wrist, but Elizabeth's sharp gaze stopped him. Not tonight, Emily, Daniel said quickly, his voice slipping into its well-practiced charm. This isn't what it looks like. Your mother's spinning everything. She never wanted us to succeed. She don't. I cut in, my voice harsher than I expected. Don't you dare twist this. You and Richard plotted behind Emily's back, behind my back, to steal what I built. Richard finally spoke, his tone icy, almost detached. Built. You act like you didn't inherit most of it yourself, Margaret. Our parents gave you the lion's share. You never earned what you flaunt. And now you're turning my niece against me because you can't stand the idea of losing. Control. Elizabeth tapped another document. Control? Let's discuss control, shall we, Mr. Whitfield? Because it isn't just money you're after. These messages show clear manipulation. Pressuring your niece through her husband to isolate her from maternal influence? That's not business, sir. That's exploitation. Emily covered her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. Uncle Richard, why? For a moment, something almost human flickered across his face. Shame, regret, longing, but it vanished quickly. Because I'm tired of being the forgotten one. Tired of watching everything funnel to you and your mother. This was my chance to finally matter. You mattered, Emily whispered. You were my uncle. I loved you. You didn't need to steal from us. Double quotes Daniel, desperate now, leaned toward her. Emily, listen. I only wanted to give us security. Yes, I made mistakes, but it was for us. For you, Elizabeth slid yet another folder across the table. For her, or for yourself? Because this, she tapped a highlighted page, is evidence of an offshore account. Mr. Daniel Whitfield deposited $45,000 here. Money traced back directly to unauthorized withdrawals from your joint account with Emily. Emily's eyes snapped wide. You stole from me. Daniel's mask cracked. It wasn't stealing. It was an investment for us. No, she said, her voice growing sharper, clearer. It was for you. Always for you. The room was suffocating. Tension wound tight around us like barbed wire. I looked at my daughter, my Emily, standing at the crossroads of betrayal and truth. Her shoulders trembled, but I saw something shift inside her. The fear, the doubt, the endless excuses she had made for Daniel. They were burning away. She looked at him with eyes I barely recognized, steady, unblinking, resolute. I'm done, Daniel. He lurched forward, but Elizabeth was faster. She stood, her presence commanding, and placed herself between him and Emily. You will not touch her again. Richard tried to interject, his voice rising. This is ridiculous. This is family business. You have no right. Elizabeth turned to him, cool and razor-sharp. On the contrary, when family business crosses into fraud, coercion, and theft, it becomes legal business. And I assure you, Mr. Whitfield, I have every right for the first time. I saw fear flicker in Richard's eyes. Emily stepped back, closer to me, her voice small but steady. Mom, what do we do now? I took her hand, squeezing it gently. Now, sweetheart, we stand together, no more secrets, no more lies. We fight this side by side. Elizabeth began gathering the evidence back into her case. I'll be filing the first injunction tomorrow morning. Restraining orders can be drafted by the end of the week. But tonight, she closed the briefcase with a snap. Tonight, you two need to understand something. What they did wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated, and it has consequences. Daniel cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. Richard sat heavily in a chair, his mask of superiority crumbling piece by piece, and for the first time in years I saw Emily's spine straighten, her chin lift, her voice steady as she looked at them both and said, You don't get to own me. You don't get to own my mother. You've both taken enough. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. That was the night everything changed. The night the masks fell away, and the people we thought we knew revealed their truest faces, and though the road ahead was long, that night was also the first step toward reclaiming what was ours, not just the money or the assets, but the truth, the freedom, the strength we had forgotten we possessed. It was the night Emily finally saw Daniel for what he was. The night she finally understood the depth of Richard's betrayal, and the night we began to fight back. The silence after Elizabeth's declaration seemed to stretch into eternity. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the air itself felt brittle, ready to shatter with the smallest word. Then Daniel broke first. He slammed his hand down on the table, rattling silverware, his voice cracking with desperation. You don't understand, Emily. Everything I did was for us. For our future. Your mother has always looked down on me, always treated me like I wasn't good enough. She would have cut me out eventually. This was my only way to secure what was rightfully ours. Emily flinched but held her ground. Rightfully ours. You mean mine, Daniel? My inheritance? My family's legacy. You tried to steal it and you lied to me every step of the way. His face flushed red, his carefully constructed charm unraveling into raw anger. I lied because you wouldn't have understood. You're too blinded by your mother's influence to see the truth. She's been controlling you since the day you were born. I stepped forward, my voice low but steady. No, Daniel. What you call control, I call love. I raised Emily to think for herself, to value honesty and loyalty, something you clearly know nothing about. Daniel's fists clenched. But before he could lash out, Elizabeth slid between us again like a shield. Careful, she warned him. Every word, every threat will only tighten the noose you've already tied around your own neck. Richard, who had been sitting silently in the corner, suddenly stood. His posture was rigid, his eyes dark, but I could see the storm brewing behind them. Enough of this, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Daniel, sit down. Margaret, you've always had a way of turning everyone against me, haven't you? I turned to face him, my heart aching at the sight of the man who used to be my brother, the boy who once played alongside me in the fields of our family estate. No, Richard, you did that yourself. I never asked you to betray me. I never asked you to drag my daughter into your schemes. His eyes narrowed, pain flickering across his expression. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed conspiring in the shadows like some criminal? I tried once to do things the right way. I asked you for a place in your life, in your heart, but you turned me away. Emily blinked, confused. What? What does he mean? I inhaled deeply, my chest tight. Years ago, before you were born, Richard proposed to me. He wanted to marry me. Emily gasped. Uncle Richard. I nodded slowly, but I said no. I told him my heart belonged to the life I wanted to build with your father, and after your father passed, I couldn't bear the thought of marrying again. I devoted myself to raising you. Emily. Richard never forgave me for that choice. Richard's voice trembled with a mixture of bitterness and longing. You chose duty over love? You chose your daughter over me? Do you know what it's like, Margaret? To stand in the shadows of your perfect little family, watching everything you ever wanted slip through your fingers? Emily's face was pale, her hands trembling. Uncle, I never knew. Of course you didn't, Richard snapped. She never told you? She painted me as the bitter brother, the greedy uncle. But the truth is, I loved her, and when she rejected me, I swore I would take back what was denied to me. I swallowed hard, fighting back the sting of tears. Love doesn't justify betrayal, Richard. Love doesn't excuse lies. If you truly loved me, you would have protected Emily, not used her as a pawn in your vendetta. Daniel, sensing his own downfall, seized on Richard's confession like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. See, Emily, this isn't about me. This is about your mother and your uncle. They've been at war for decades, and you're just collateral damage. I was only trying to survive between them. But Emily shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. No, Daniel, you had a choice. You could have stood by me. You could have been honest. Instead, you chose lies, greed, and betrayal. Don't you dare blame them for your decisions. Elizabeth stepped forward, her tone crisp. Well said, Emily. That clarity is exactly what you'll need in the weeks ahead. She turned her gaze to Richard and Daniel. You both need to understand something. The law doesn't bend to broken hearts or sob stories. Fraud is fraud. Manipulation is manipulation. And when the evidence is this strong, the courts will have no mercy. Richard's mask cracked further. His lips curled into a bitter smile. Courts, you think you can drag me through the mud in front of strangers? I've weathered worse storms, Margaret. I'll fight you with everything I have. Then you'll lose, I said softly, but with conviction. Because this time, you're not just fighting me, you're fighting my daughter. And we're stronger together than you ever imagined. For a moment, the fire in Richard's eyes dimmed, replaced by something almost vulnerable. But then Daniel exploded, his voice echoing through the room. I won't let you ruin me. You don't know what I've sacrificed. You don't know what it took to claw my way into this family, to prove I belonged. Emily's voice rose above his rage, clear and sharp as a bell. You never belonged, Daniel. You never tried to. All you ever wanted was what you could take. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Daniel lunged, but Elizabeth was faster, slamming her briefcase shut and stepping forward with authority. Enough. I'll be contacting the police first thing in the morning. If either of you tries to interfere with Margaret or Emily before then, you'll regret it. Richard's chest heaved, his face pale, his eyes wild. Daniel, cornered and furious, retreated a step, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own downfall. Emily clung to my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. Mom, I'm ready. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. I kissed her forehead, my heart swelling with pride. Then we'll face it together, and just as I thought the night couldn't grow any darker, Elizabeth pulled one final folder from her case. She placed it gently on the table, her eyes locking with mine. Margaret, there's one more thing, something you need to see. I frowned, dread curling in my stomach. What is it? She hesitated, her voice low. Evidence suggests Daniel and Richard weren't acting alone. There's another party involved, someone you both know, someone closer than you realize. Emily's breath caught. Richard stiffened. Daniel's eyes darted to the floor. I remember standing frozen in my own living room, the storm outside echoing the storm within me. The knock at the door had silenced everyone. Emily's face was pale, her eyes darting between me and Richard, who who sat with his arms crossed, smug but nervous. Daniel lingered near the fireplace, trying to maintain his composure, but failing with every twitch of his jaw. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. When I opened the door, the last person they expected was standing there. It wasn't another family member or a neighbor, it was Thomas Keating, a private investigator and lawyer I had quietly hired weeks ago, after the first whisper of suspicion crawled into my mind. His tall frame filled the doorway, his trench coat dripping with rain, and in his hand was a leather folder swollen with documents. I stepped aside. "Come in, Thomas." The tension shifted instantly. Richard's smirk faltered. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass of scotch. Emily blinked in confusion, her voice shaking as she asked, "Mom, what's going on? Who is this?" "This," I said firmly, closing the door behind him, "is the man who has been watching everything. While you were busy weaving your lies, Daniel, while you were making secret deals behind my back, Richard, I was already a step ahead." Thomas laid the folder on the coffee table and calmly looked around the room like a surgeon about to cut out rot. "Mrs. Whitmore retained my services to track financial irregularities tied to her company. What I uncovered," he opened the folder and began spreading out documents, "is a trail of deceit that links both of you." Emily's gasp echoed. "Daniel, no. Tell me this isn't what it looks like." But Daniel didn't answer. His silence was as damning as any confession. Thomas continued, his voice steady, professional, merciless. "Over the past year, Daniel funneled company assets into shell accounts. Richard helped conceal these movements, leveraging his connections in the business community. Together, they planned to bleed the estate dry, leaving Elizabeth and you, Emily, with nothing." Emily clutched the armrest, staring at her husband like she'd never seen him before. "You lied to me?" For years, Daniel finally spoke, his tone sharp, defensive. "Emily, I did it for us. For our future. Your mother's been hoarding wealth, controlling everything, never trusting us with real responsibility. Richard and I were taking what should rightfully be ours." My voice shook with anger. "Yours, you call stealing mine. Betraying Emily, betraying this family? That's your definition of rightful?" Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. Elizabeth, you knew I loved you once. You knew it years ago when I asked for your hand and you turned me down. You chose Robert, and then after he died, you chose solitude and control. You could have had me. You could have had loyalty. Instead, you left me in the shadows. All I ever wanted was a place in this family, and when you wouldn't give it willingly, I decided to take it." Emily's face twisted in disbelief. "Uncle Richard, you proposed to my mom?" The old wound I had buried surfaced in full force. I took a deep breath, my voice low but unwavering. "Yes, Emily. After your father passed, Richard came to me. He said he loved me, that he could take care of us both, that he could step into your father's shoes. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not because I hated him, but because I loved you too much. I didn't want to complicate your life or force you into a family dynamic that felt unnatural. So I said no." Tears stung Emily's eyes as she turned toward Richard. "And you carried that grudge all these years. You let rejection poison you until you decided to destroy us?" Richard's voice cracked, years of bitterness boiling over. "You don't understand what it's like to always be second choice. Always standing outside while someone else gets the life you wanted. I gave decades to this family, only to be treated like a spare part." Thomas placed another document on the table, this one heavier than the rest. "Bitterness is one thing, Mr. Whitmore. Fraud is another. I have signed records, transaction trails, and evidence tying both you and Daniel to this scheme. The only choice left is how this ends, through negotiation or through federal court." Daniel shot to his feet, his face red, his voice desperate. "Emily, don't listen to them. They're twisting everything. This is just business. Your mother hired a man to spin a story that makes us look like villains because she can't let go of her empire." Emily's hands shook as she stood, her voice breaking. "But Daniel, these are your signatures. Your accounts. These lies aren't hers, they're yours." Silence blanketed the room. For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked completely. The charming son-in-law, the devoted husband, the ambitious partner, it all crumbled. In its place stood a man revealed for what he truly was: greedy, calculating, and cruel. I looked directly at him. You underestimated me, Daniel. You thought I was a widow too blind with grief to protect what I built. You thought Emily was too in love to see through your manipulation. And Richard, you thought your old wound made you entitled to take what was mine? But you both made the same mistake. You forgot that I don't break under pressure. I fight, Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mom, what do we do now? I put my hand on hers, steadying her. Now, Emily, we take back control. Not just of the money. Not just of the company, but of our lives. Thomas spoke again, his words like a gavel. I've already filed injunctions to freeze the accounts Daniel used. Law enforcement is on standby. But Elizabeth wanted to give you one last chance to confess and walk away quietly. If you refuse... He looked from Richard to Daniel. Then the law will handle it. Richard looked defeated, his shoulders sagging as if decades of bitterness had finally weighed him down. But Daniel's eyes burned with something darker. He stepped closer, his voice low, venomous. You think you've won, Elizabeth? You think bringing in a lawyer changes what's already in motion? You've started a war you can't finish. At that, Thomas slipped a small recording device onto the table. A faint red light blinked. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. That's on record. For a long moment, no one moved. The storm outside had quieted, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the crackling fireplace. Finally, Richard muttered, almost to himself, all these years, and this is how it ends. Emily turned to him, her voice filled with sorrow but also with strength I hadn't heard before. No, Uncle, this ends with you both facing the consequences of your choices. Not just for what you tried to steal from Mom, but for what you tried to steal from me, my trust, my marriage, my family. I squeezed her hand. Spoken like the strong woman you were always meant to be, within the hour, law enforcement arrived. Richard surrendered quietly, his eyes hollow, his bitterness finally spent. Daniel resisted until the end, shouting accusations, blaming everyone but himself, until the officers led him away in handcuffs. The house felt eerily quiet after they were gone, like a battlefield after the smoke clears. Emily sat beside me, holding my hand tightly. Mom, I don't even know what to say. I pulled her close, whispering, you don't need to say anything. We survived. That's enough for now, but survival was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Thomas worked tirelessly to untangle the mess. The accounts were restored. The estate was secured. Richard and Daniel faced trial, their betrayals laid bare for the world to see. Emily testified bravely, her voice steady even as her heart broke. And through it all, I stood beside her, not just as her mother, but as her ally, her shield, her proof that betrayal could be turned into strength. Months later, as we sat on the porch of our family home, the sun setting over the hills, Emily rested her head on my shoulder. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I doubted you. I kissed her forehead. Don't be sorry. You trusted the man you loved. That's not a weakness. That's humanity. What matters is that you found the strength to see the truth when it mattered most. She smiled through her tears. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out, I said softly, and as the night settled around us, I realized the greatest victory wasn't the money or the company, it was the bond between us, tested by fire but unbroken. The story of betrayal had become the story of resilience. The story of greed had become the story of strength. And the story of loss had become the story of hope, because in the end, true wealth isn't measured in dollars or property. It's measured in the love we protect, the family we fight for, and the courage we carry when the world tries to break us. And that was my story. My truth, her true story.